Story 1. In 1894, the entire state of Ohio only had two automobiles on the road. And guess what? They crashed into each other. Story 2. World War I is infinitely more interesting than World War II to me for many reasons. For one, it is much more morally gray. World War II is one of the few conflicts where one side is cartoonishly evil. That is not to say the combatants in the First World War were angels, but both sides had similar goals. I also find it fascinating how it became the crossroads of the old aristocratic world order and the mechanical industrial world that followed. It is one of those conflicts that had such a profound impact on history that it is hard to imagine what would have happened if it had gone differently. Story 3. The Krakatoa eruption of 1883 was heard thousands of miles away. It was the loudest known event in human history. Consider how loud it had to be to travel that far. Story 4. I have always been curious about the events that led up to the Bronze Age collapse. There is so much mystery. How do we know so little about the Sea Peoples? They were obviously a very powerful group that changed the world. If that is a mystery, then most things from that time are a mystery to us. Story 5. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest was a guerrilla assault by Germanic tribes in a dense forest that wiped out an entire Roman legion when the Roman Empire seemed unstoppable. This event largely halted Roman expansion in the area. The battle was so devastating that it was not only historically significant but also linguistically impactful. All languages to the east remained Germanic, while languages spoken west of that region in areas of full Roman occupation, modern-day Portugal, Spain, and France, are Latinate. Story 6. Enigaldi created a public museum in the city of Ur in 530 BCE. One item found in the excavations was a fine sculpture of a ram caught in a thicket, made around 2,000 years earlier. Story 7. The 1556 Shaanxi earthquake in China killed an estimated 830,000 people, the highest known death toll of any earthquake. However, how was this figure determined, and what is actually known about this earthquake outside of China? It is certainly not widely discussed. Story 8. It's cliché, but the Titanic. I can only imagine all those people at 2 a.m. with 0 degrees in total darkness, sinking in freezing water, begging for someone to save them. Story 9. The 2004 tsunami is an incredible natural phenomenon. If you are on a boat just off the coast, you might not even notice it. However, the destruction along the coastline is severe. I have been interested ever since I saw an old book with a before and after picture of a man alone on a beach. In the after picture, the beach was completely gone, replaced by swirling, massive waves. It is truly eerie. Story 10. The Mississippi burning murders are significant because they happen near where I grew up, and my father knew a few of the people involved in the crime. Story 11. I am quite interested in forced migration and the ways land changes ownership, particularly in 20th century Europe. Examples include the Prussian territories of Germany and the eastern territories of Poland. I have visited several places and always like to see what traces of the exiled populations remain. Places such as Gdansk, Vilnius, and Bielsko-Biała. Story 12. The 1969 moon landing is remarkable to consider. It is incredible how humanity progressed from barely achieving flight to walking on another world in less than 70 years. Story 13. The business plot and the Battle of Blair Mountain. They fascinate me and also feel very prescient. Story 14. The way Castro and Guevara took over Cuba by mere propaganda is astonishing. They started a revolutionary movement with false stories through the media. They convinced people their movement was winning a war, which ultimately led to their success. It makes me wonder how effective that would be today, since it is easier to fact-check, but it is also easier to be misled by internet conflicts and misinformation on social media platforms. Story 15. Why did a sophisticated country like Germany give its decision-making to an unqualified leader like Adolf Hitler? Something about this feels relevant. Story 16. The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. How can something that was practically an accident end up rippling out so far that we are still feeling the aftermath? Story 17. The 1618 defenestration of Prague, one of 3, is particularly fascinating and is one of the inciting events of the 30 Years' War. I used to know a lot about it, but nowadays I find it interesting because of its role in European history and how it popularized the word defenestrate. Story 18. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest was marked by the betrayal of Arminius. Give me back my legions. This event ended Roman expansion into Germania. It is fascinating, truly world-changing, and surprisingly few people know about it. Story 19. The Potsdam Agreement of 1945 resulted in Germany losing all of its territories east of the Oder River. Germans who had not escaped before the Russian conquest were expelled over the next few years. Poland received Silesia, Pomerania, and the southern two-thirds of East Prussia. The northern third of East Prussia, including Königsberg, was given to Russia. The process of emptying entire regions of their original inhabitants and replacing them with new populations within 2 to 4 years is remarkable. Story 20. 1942 United States Navy torpedo scandal. Because I have this fantasy that if the United States had, just once, held incompetent leaders accountable, it would have set an example for the future. In the 1930s, the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance invented a magnetic torpedo detonator. Budget constraints and the high cost of torpedoes meant they were not tested thoroughly against real targets, but the Bureau believed they were infallible. When World War II began and Admiral Nimitz and his team started unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan, the results were disappointing. Senior officers and submarine crews quickly realized that commanders promoted under a strict, risk-averse pre-war culture were ineffective in actual combat. Submarines that fired torpedoes often failed to score hits. More aggressive captains began publicly complaining about faulty torpedoes. The Bureau of Ordnance blamed poor torpedo handling and forbade captains from disabling magnetic detonators in favor of contact detonators. Some captains ignored this without better results. The Bureau prevented external testing, but Charles Lockwood, in charge of the Navy's Australian submarine base, conducted informal tests by firing torpedoes through fishing nets, and discovered torpedoes ran 11 feet deeper than their settings allowed. Crews then secretly used contact detonators and shallower depth settings, but problems persisted. Eventually, tests at Pearl Harbor revealed that contact detonators only functioned on oblique impacts. Near perpendicular hits bent the firing pin. Replacement pins were not readily available. Ultimately, the Bureau of Ordnance received oversight for torpedo production, and the Navy assigned an expert who developed a solution for the firing pin issue. For several months, United States torpedoes used firing pins made from wreckage of Japanese aircraft from Pearl Harbor. Meanwhile, submarine crews were dying, and nearly all United States torpedo bomber crews at the Battle of Midway were lost using ineffective torpedoes. The Bureau's personnel largely retained their positions, and no significant disciplinary records have been noted. Imagine a world where architects of the Vietnam or Iraq wars knew they would face consequences for failures or deceit. It would be a very different United States than the one we know. Story 21. The signing of the Declaration of Independence had many potential issues, and some did occur, yet it still succeeded. Story 22. The crash of United Airlines Flight 232 in Sioux City, Iowa. Story 23. The defenestration of Prague. When you are not happy with your local leaders, it turns out you can just throw them out of a window. Story 24. Tunguska Blast of 1908. Roanoke Colony Disappearance. I would not say I am fixated, but these are the first things I think of and am curious about because they are unexplained. Story 25. 1848 Springtime of Nations. Its effects shaped the world I was born into, and I witnessed its influence disappear from this world. Story 26. I will watch a documentary on the Winter War between Russia and Finland at least once a month. I cannot provide details about it because I am not fully attentive every time I watch it. Story 27. Too many remember the June uprising in South Korea and what happened in Gwangju before it. South Korea was under a military dictatorship where martial law was imposed, and there were no elections. In the 1980s, there were continuous student protests and strikes or factory occupations by workers. Student leaders would rotate leadership of protests. With the Olympics approaching, it added pressure on the government to address the protests. The death and torture of a student protester led to massive support and more civilian protesters. Office workers began to strike, and parents joined in. Elections were called, but the opposition party had two candidates, which essentially split the vote. One frontrunner was almost executed by the dictator and would later pardon the dictator himself. That election was lost, but elections returned. Sufficient pressure caused reforms and victories in future elections, leading to putting the dictator on trial for massacres and money laundering. Story 28. December 12, 2000. When the United States Supreme Court, by a vote of 5-4, halted the Florida recount and decided the United States presidential election in favor of George W. Bush. If not for this turning point, there would be a President Gore who would have 1. Taken on climate change before it was too late. 2. Not ignored the bin Laden threat like Bush did. 3. Not invaded Iraq, saving trillions of dollars and thousands of lives. No Abu Ghraib. 4. Potentially appointed 2 progressive Supreme Court justices, if granted a second term instead of Roberts and Alito. 5. Possibly brought in desperately needed reforms to the electoral system for obvious reasons. Ideally, he would have simply won outright without any recount. But no, people thought Al Gore was too boring to be president. Now, look at the chaotic situation you have. Story 29. September 11th marked the downfall of many aspects of society, including politics, music, leisure activities, public health, and more. Story 30. The life of the pirate Queen Granuaile, also known as Grace O'Malley, and the uprising that Boudica led in 61 AD. Story 31. Spotsylvania was a battle in the American Civil War where the Union Army suffered many casualties, and almost no ground was gained. General Ulysses S. Grant, according to historians, sacrificed the lives of his men for little gain. Story 32. Franklin's Lost Expedition. They identified the captain of the Erebus last September and confirmed that he had been cannibalized. Story 33. Post-Cold War Geopolitics. It is interesting how much geopolitics changed from 1991 until about 2003, with no real superpower backing any side. The revolutions around the world that followed the fall of the Soviet Union are also interesting and how they affect modern geopolitics. Story 34. Not a precise event per se, but the global financial crisis. I was graduating college in 2008 and going into the military, so I was living among it without truly experiencing it. I did not know much about economies or home ownership. I had no clue why it was happening but knew it was momentous. Story 35. An April 1561 broadsheet by Hans Glaser described a mass sighting of celestial phenomena or unidentified flying objects above Nuremberg, then a free imperial city of the Holy Roman Empire. Researchers have speculated that these phenomena may have been extraterrestrial spacecraft. Skeptics assert that the phenomenon was likely another atmospheric event, such as a sundog, although the print does not fit the usual classic description of the phenomena. History. A broadsheet news article printed in April 1561 describes a mass sighting of celestial phenomena. The broadsheet, illustrated with a woodcut and text by Hans Glaser, measures 26.2 centimeters by 38.0 centimeters. The document is archived in the Prints and Drawings collection at the Zentralbibliothek Zurich in Zurich, Switzerland. According to the broadsheet, around dawn on April 14, 1561, many men and women of Nuremberg saw what the broadsheet describes as an aerial battle out of the sun, followed by the appearance of a large black triangular object and exhausted combatant spheres falling to earth in clouds of smoke. The broadsheet claims that witnesses observed hundreds of spheres, cylinders, and other odd-shaped objects that moved erratically overhead. The woodcut illustration depicts objects of various shapes, including crosses with or without spheres on the arms, small spheres, 2 large crescents, a black spear, and cylindrical objects from which several small spheres emerged and darted around the sky at dawn. Story 36. Ruby Ridge. I noticed it when it happened in 1992, and while it was not the first time I had heard about neo-Nazis, I could tell there was something different about that incident. In my opinion, we should have leveled that place and sent a message to the militia groups. Since then, I have observed federal authorities retreat every time they are confronted with these individuals. Waco, Oklahoma City, the infiltration of our military and law enforcement, and finally Donald Trump. I have been fixated on this slow-motion train wreck for over 30 years, and most of the time it has felt like screaming into the void. Story 37. I recently conducted an in-depth study of how the State of Israel was founded, because I wanted to be better informed when discussing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. When people say it is complicated, they are not exaggerating. Story 38. World War II, specifically between D-Day and Victory in Europe Day, and more specifically the Battle of the Bulge, the final German offensive. I am very interested in military tactics. There were countless tactics used in the campaign, from divisions to companies to squads to individual soldiers. The events are extremely well documented, and most key areas, such as the landing beaches, remain preserved by the French. Story 39. The missions in Afghanistan always bring something new and now count as history. I listened to an interview with Craig Harrison at work today. He holds the record for the furthest confirmed kill in the war. Story 40. Battle of Bataan and the Bataan Death March. I am training to participate in the Memorial Ruck in White Sands, New Mexico. Story 41. The crash of Air Florida Flight 90 into the Potomac River in January 1982 involved a two-person helicopter crew who rescued 5 people. These individuals had been in 34-degree water for 20 to 30 minutes with only a rope for aid. In April 2020, a mass shooting occurred in Nova Scotia, where a violent individual known to the police and many others murdered 22 people over 13 hours. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police made significant errors in their response. Story 42. There are more examples. The First Czechoslovak Republic, anti-fascist and anti-communist resistance, and the invasion of 1968. Story 43. Navy intelligence ship USS Pueblo's capture by North Korea in 1968. 1 crew member was killed, and the remaining 82 were taken prisoner and held for 11 months. Story 44. Turn of the century Hollywood. From 1890 to 1920. Up to 1950 is also interesting, but it is all very intriguing to me. Story 45. Berlin, Germany, around 1945. The time when reports from the front began to turn negative, and the population realized they had been deceived and would lose the war. Those few months are fascinating to study. Story 46. World War I, to me, is absolutely fascinating. The tide turned from honorable war to industrialized killing, leading to the end of 4 empires. The Christmas truce and nights were originally part of the war at the beginning. Everything about World War I is so different, reflecting the changing times in many different ways. Story 47. Deputy Leader Rudolf Hess independently flew to Scotland in 1941, landing on a farm to negotiate peace. He then spent the rest of the war in jail. After the war, he spent the rest of his life in Spandau prison, where he died in 1987. He was the only prisoner there for 21 years. Story 48. The Tylenol murders are a huge tragedy, and there are still no solid leads. I wish people would learn from those who went around licking ice cream in stores in 2019, realizing that tamper-evident seals on food should be a legal standard. While thankfully no one died, this incident proves that a Tylenol murders case could affect standard food, and we should implement these protections since food tampering is evidently easy. This is a very interesting case, and I am glad Tylenol's parent company took it extremely seriously and pushed for laws requiring tamper-evident packaging. Story 49. The entirety of Genghis Khan's rule and its outcome stretch further than anything else in modern history. Story 50. Collapse of Indus Valley Civilization. Assad laughing at Gaddafi at an Arab League summit when he said they would overthrow him next. What if Donald Trump never ran for election and had no interest in politics? Story 51. For years, it was unclear what happened to Richard III, but we now know, showing us all that events can just come out of the blue to surprise us. Story 52. That one Norwegian man on the bridge in 1066. The Battle of Stamford Bridge. One brave warrior held off an entire army, killing 40 soldiers before they got sneaky and stabbed him from under the bridge. Story 53. The advancement of deoxyribonucleic acid and its ability to solve cold cases. When they caught Joseph James D'Angelo Jr., known as the original Night Stalker, Golden State Killer, and Visalia Ransacker, it absolutely blew my mind. He is known to have started committing crimes as early as 1974 and was not apprehended until 2018. Story 54. The Miracle on Ice played out exactly like a Disney ragtag sports team feel-good movie. It was as if the rules of real life stopped working to create that perfect movie moment. The only thing missing was that the game did not end with someone scoring a goal. I am an artist who also likes to write, and I am always fascinated by real-life events that unfold just like a story. Story 55. The entire lives of Philip of Macedonia and Alexander the Great can be described as extraordinary events in human history. The possibilities are endless. Story 56. The Bronze Age collapse affected ancient Egypt, Anatolia, and the wider Mediterranean area. Supply lines collapsed, and a large part of the world imploded as the semi-mythical sea peoples rampaged through every civilization. This destruction ended multiple great empires and plunged the world into a dark age. Story 57. Chernobyl, September 11th, plane crashes, boat sinkings, etc. The frustrating thing is that in every tragedy, there is usually someone who could have stopped it but did not or made it worse. For example, in boat sinkings where the person meant to be in control of the ship was absent, involved elsewhere, or was the first to get on a lifeboat, leaving everyone else on the ship, such as in the Sewol Ferry or Costa Concordia incidents. Story 58. Gavrilo Princip was able to kill Archduke Ferdinand because of the most absurd coincidence. Imagine that. We got World War I, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, the occupation of Eastern Europe, North Korea, Communist China, the Vietnam War, and pretty much everything in between because of a random coincidence. Without World War I breaking European demography, the European empires would have lasted decades more, could have demographically colonized more territories, and global culture would not be the same. Hitler would have opened a kebab shop in Vienna. Imperial Russia would still exist and be a 400 million behemoth. China would have always been a capitalist society and would have missed decades of catastrophes. The current borders in the Middle East would be different. All that because Gavrilo felt like having a sandwich. Story 59. Today, I asked Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer to conduct deep research and develop a plan to pay off the national debt in 10 years using a startup. Story 60. The Franklin Expedition. In 1845, the two British ships Erebus and Terror were searching in the Arctic for the Northwest Passage. Both ships and their crews disappeared. The Inuit people's accounts of interactions with survivors are terrifying, describing skeletal men committing cannibalism. While some physical evidence has been found and many theories, some more plausible than others, exist, no one truly knows what happened. Story 61. Space Shuttle Challenger disaster and the Chernobyl disaster. Strange combination maybe, but they seem to have a lot in common. Management pushing and overruling engineers and trying to partially cover up afterwards. Story 62. My main historical focus is understanding why, despite numerous examples throughout history of failures that have negatively impacted people, we continue to repeat the same mistakes as a species. Story 63. Ever since I was a child, it has been Chernobyl. I read books, watched documentaries, and read articles about the high levels of birth defects in the region. It was something I found truly scary. Later, I played the Stalker games, and Call of Duty even featured a section in Chernobyl. I watched the excellent HBO series. It is one of those bucket list things to visit someday. Story 64. Germany in World War II. I do not focus on it because they were a totalitarian genocidal regime, but rather their impressive military strength. All those conquests in just 2 years were extremely impressive until Adolf Hitler took over the high command. Story 65. The peopling of the Americas, when it happened and how it happened, is a significant mystery at this time. Story 66. The 2000 presidential election gave us the Roberts Court, two expensive and futile wars, the USA Patriot Act, and the 2008 recession. If Ralph Nader had backed off, or if the butterfly ballot had not been approved, Florida would have gone to Gore by several thousand votes. Another event not mentioned as often was the photo of a federal agent pointing a rifle at Elian Gonzalez. That likely cost enough Cuban-American votes to lose the state. If any of these events had not occurred, Gore would have won, and this would be a different country today. Story 67. As a lover of all things history, It is a tough one. But for the purpose of this, I will choose D-Day. Everything about it, the planning, the deceptions, the day itself. It is incredible. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.